writer. Oh, we're being recorded. Okay. Let's just dive right in. I loved this book. It was such a treat. It was so well written, so entertaining, so suspenseful, and fun because it takes place in Massachusetts and in Boston and so many of the South Shore towns that I see a lot of people here are from. So that will be really fun for folks if they haven't read it yet. What drew you to writing this story in particular?
Well, this story has sort of been percolating for a long time in my unconscious, and every once in a while it would push its way forward. But I wasn't really ready to write it until I was certain that I had the lead characters, that I really knew the setting, and that I had figured out how I was going to work in the whole piece of the theater into the story. That was super important for me to get right. The theater is very important to me, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a backdrop, but that it was actual integral to the story of what happens with the characters. The novel explores the persona that we put on to the public. Mm-hmm. It really thinks about issues related to why we keep certain things from the people we love the most. Why are we sometimes not divulging our most, deep concerns with the people that we're closest to? And once I knew that the theater was going to be integral to figuring that all out, I was ready to go.
That's so fascinating. I hadn't even put that together of like the masks we wear and the roles we play. I loved that. It was very well done. There's so many references to plays and you organized it into acts. And you're right. So many of your characters are carrying really big secrets. Mm-hmm. Do you think, in your background as a therapist, are secrets ever justified or healthy to keep, or is this part of sort of the downfall of relationships in this book?
Well, secrets are, when we talk about secrets, we're thinking about sort of the negative, right? That which we're keeping from other people. And so it must be dark and it must be, that we've done something wrong. But the truth is, healthy disclosure and healthy boundaries are really important to having good, solid relationships. So what fascinates me in fiction is that there's a fine line between when something is a healthy boundary and when something is a secret that's going to trip you up, right? And so that's what happens to each of these characters, is that in one case, there's one character who he and his sister believe that keeping their secret is actually better for everyone in their family. And they struggle with it. They struggle with owning the secret, but they believe that holding it is kinder than divulging it.
Right. I mean, are you allowed to, I'm trying to be very careful. Your book just came out on the 9th, I believe. Like, I don't know if everyone's had a chance to read it yet, but can you reveal a little bit about what that secret is without giving too much away?
Sure. So there's a detective in the story who is tasked with figuring out who abducted 2 girls. And it's his job to figure out all the backstory, all the behind the scenes. Think of it as sort of what's happening backstage, right? And at the same time, what's happening is he's holding a secret about a young person who died when he was in high school. And so he's investigating this crime that happened to 2 people in high school, but he's holding the story of what happened to him and his sister in high school. And since he can't divulge his secret, he looks for redemption in the case. He feels that if he solves the case, somehow it'll be a bit of a clean slate. Well, of course, that's up for debate, right? Whether or not redemption with one scenario cleanses you of your sins in another area of your life. And I think he really struggles with that.
Yeah. I liked how there's so many years separated from his own incident and what he's investigating now, that he now has the perspective of an adult rather than a teenager, right? And so in all of our lives, the stuff that happens when you're young, you interpret it in a certain way based on your young, limited experience. But when you're older, if you have a chance to revisit it with perspective and life experience, that there's maybe better decisions that can be made about it, or just another way to live with the decisions and the experiences as they unfolded back then.
Right. And I think
whole new meaning.
Exactly. And there's a mirror scenario with the mother that it plays the major role in the story, because her husband struggles with addiction. And She gets trapped in her role, as you were saying, the roles we play, the parts that are assigned to us, not the ones that we necessarily audition for in our own lives, right? But in her case, it's only after this crisis happens in her family that she can see how really toxic and how stressful her family life was, because she was so slowly sliding into the role of caretaker. She doesn't have perspective, even though she is an adult, until suddenly crash, something happens, and suddenly she's sort of awakened from how numb she's become to her life.
Yeah. And so addiction plays a big role in this book too. So we have Zeke's addiction, we have the high school students, with dealing with drugs, and what led you to choose addiction as a topic for these characters to wrestle with?
Well, like you, Lisa, I have so many issues that I want to talk about, and I always have to grapple with whether or not I'm going to do it in a fictional story or whether I'm going to do it in a nonfiction, more prescriptive book. And so I actually thought I would write a book about addiction and what the impact on family life was. That when people are living in the shadow of addiction, not those who are struggling themselves, but partners and children, how they contend with it. So I started thinking I was going to write a nonfiction book about it. And I had begun to do a lot of focus group research, and I had met with a lot of families that were willing to share their struggles. And then I didn't feel like I could be prescriptive about something this complex. It plays out in family life so uniquely and so differently that I really felt like fiction would be a safer place to let readers examine what might be happening in their own families. There is something beautiful about fiction in giving people some space, be able to examine what they might be struggling with, but do it with the characters. And
and you did such a beautiful job of that. You write with such compassion for your characters. There's no judgment in how you tell their stories, and so I think that does allow us to we don't need to villainize anyone or judge anyone. Like you give so much space for us to feel empathy for what each of these characters are going through. Yeah, no, it's really well done. And so I so appreciate your background as a counselor and how much research and professional experience goes into the portrayal of these characters who are dealing with relationship issues and mental health issues and addiction, because there's so much depth to this mystery, right? So this thriller story, which I think a lot of mysteries might just sort of like ride the surface, but there's a lot of depth here, and that just shines because of your background for sure.
Well, that's a huge compliment coming from you, because I feel like you do the same thing. You don't want your fiction to read like sort of nonfiction in disguise. You really want the observations about what people struggle with to just appear through the characters. I never want to be really heavy-handed, but I also never really want to play the blame game, because I think people are complicated. And one of the characters that's the most complex and probably makes the most egregious decisions is still very dear to me. I see his humanity, and I see that he's a person who's a really good person who's struggling with a really horrible disease.
This is Zeke.
Yes.
Yes. I was just going to ask you, who was your favorite character to write in this, and who was the most difficult character to write, and why?
I love Zeke, but he was probably the most difficult because, again, I really wanted the addiction portrayal not to be any kind of a caricature, but I also didn't want it to be a blame game. I purposely gave him the issue to struggle with of gambling, because I think alcohol and prescription drugs brings with it a whole other dynamic. But I think by thinking about gambling as something that is equally challenging to a family, that was all really complex, and I wanted to get that right. The one that was the most fun for me to write was the detective. He also is a very talented musician in the story, and he plays jazz piano, and my son is a jazz pianist. So
so like, I had so at the Beehive, you know your stuff.
That was really fun for me because my son, gave me a lot of technical advising, which was super fun.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that part felt really authentic to me too. And the last novel I wrote, Every Note Played, my two of my main characters are pianists, and trying to write about musicians authentically, like that's a whole other level of like, okay, I need to know what I'm doing here because I don't want to pretend and have it feel not real. But that's a lot of, you have a good son to
Yes, he
help
was
you with that.
wonderful. I
Because it
have to
felt,
say that when I originally started writing those passages where Fitz is in the beehive and he's playing piano to an empty room, right?
yeah, yeah.
He, when I was doing that, I had a lot of the piano playing pieces, and my son was like, "Well, no, mom, he wouldn't be able to do that if he was doing this," and I was saying, "Thank you so
Yeah,
much."
keep it real, mom. Yeah, I'm gonna stay in that sensory moment to moment detail, and he knows
Exactly.
it. So that's super helpful. Yeah, that was great. He was a really fun character. I liked him,
Yeah.
right? I wanted to hang out with Fitz.
Yeah, and I didn't want him to be, again, I didn't want him to sort of be a stereotypical cop. I wanted him to be somebody who was practicing bravado. He was, again, putting on a role. He was
Mm,
pretending to interrogate and pretending to be a tough guy. But on
hmm.
the inside, he's really sensitive and he's really thoughtful and he's really struggling with that secret that he's keeping.
Yeah, a lot of vulnerability in Fitz. Yeah. Sin, the character of Sin. Is there a lot of you? Or yeah, a lot of you in
Yeah.
Sin?
Yeah. So
Tell us a little bit about Sin.
sure. So I knew that I wanted to put a very particular kind of counselor in this story. Whenever someone has been abducted and then returned to their life, there's a particular kind of counselor that works with the family, and they're
Mhm.
called a reunification counselor. So if you think about Elizabeth Smart or JC Dugard, or really anyone who has experienced that trauma, when they return, they need a very specific kind of sensitivity training, thoughtful counseling, not only for them, but also for their family members. And so I wanted to write about that kind of counselor. And so Sin Rollins is a reunification therapist, and
Mhm.
she works with people who have been abducted and experienced trauma and have been returned to their families. And so she too is trying to deal with a very challenging job, one that comes with a lot of weight and heaviness. But at the same time, she's a sensitive soul and she's trying to figure out her own life and some of the betrayals that have happened along her way.
Yeah, you did a really beautiful job of weaving all of these characters who are on the one hand separate, leading their own lives. You wove them together in a way that felt very organic and meaningful, so that everybody had a backstory and a depth and a reason to be there that felt very integral to the story. Um, um, so she was great. And so you got to use a lot of you and what you do, um, which was fabulous. Tell me about writing about teenagers. How did you get into the mindset of writing teenagers and their voice?
I think if we all think about a time in our lives where we've become the most vulnerable, I'd say that for me it was when I was a teenager. So I was 15 when my father died, and we had kind of an idyllic family. My parents were together. I had siblings. We were all happy, healthy people, and we were doing all on the outside quite well emotionally. But then my father died unexpectedly of a heart attack when I was 15. And suddenly my mother was the mother of four teenagers.
Oh my gosh.
And it was really challenging.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I always, when I'm thinking about vulnerability and when I'm thinking about what I want my characters to be pulling from, I always find myself in some way going back to those days when I felt most vulnerable myself. So to write a teenager felt a little bit freeing for me, because I really wanted to be able to examine what it feels like to want to live in your healthy world with your friends and do the things you love, while at the same time your own family feels like it's crumbling. And
Hmm.
I really felt like it was freeing to be able to try to examine what it feels like to pretend on the outside that everything is fine when it's not.
Mm, yes. And your character, all of your characters are doing that in
Yes.
some ways, right?
They're all
Um,
on stage in one form or another.
they're all on stage. Oh, that was brilliant how you organized this with all of those references to plays, and the kids are at this performing arts school on Newbury Street, and very competitive.
Yes.
This group of kids and their moms. Tell us a little bit about Anna. Why is she in your story?
Yeah. So the Performing Arts High School is in a real building. So it's the Exeter Street Theater, the former Exeter Street Theater. But I fictionalized it as a performing arts high school that's high stakes. So you get in on audition and you are there because you're making a career out of acting. You have two paths. You're either going to New York and you're going to be doing, acting in theater, live theater, or you're heading to California and you're gonna try film. So these are all competitive kids, but they're all really talented kids. And so there's a lot of competition between them. But then there's the whole piece about their parents and how their parents perceive their careers and the directions that they're going in. And there's one character in particular, Anna, who's the mother of a boy who's really the star of the school. And she is your classic stage mother. She makes no apologies for pushing him, driving him, making it very clear what his path is. And the reason why this felt compelling to me to write about is because whether your children are in theater or in sports or they're applying to college, all parents understand what it's like to be caught up in that competitive parenting sort of hamster wheel, right? Where it feels like I have to do what everybody else is doing, even if I don't really feel like that's right for me or it's right for my child. Because if I don't, then is it a disservice to my child? So I wanted to explore that high stakes, high pressure parenting, and theater was just another really great way to do it.
Yeah, and Anna was super invested.
She really was.
In her son.
She made no bones about it either.
Yeah, she was. If in imagining the movie of this story, have you cast it yet in your mind? Do you have any sense of like who would play who?
I actually thought a lot about Reese Witherspoon when I thought about her because
totally. Well, she kind of plays that role a lot, right?
If she does, she
Big
did
Little
really
Lies, the mom in Big Little Lies.
Big Little Lies. Yep. That's what made me.
Or Little Fires Everywhere. Yep. I could see her. She'd be good in that. It's her role. You hear that, Reese? We've got your next role. What else? What about location? Do you just let's talk about process a little. You have so many vividly described locations in this story. Are these places you already know? Do you go there and visit and sort of get in the sights, the smells, the feeling of being there at that time of year? Like, how do you evoke such a sense of place in your story?
Well, from the novels that have come before, I've always taken places that I love, but I've fictionalized them, and it gave me a lot of freedom to create, a Cape Cod town that has a made-up name, or to create, any other city that I might want to explore. So I've fictionalized all of my places until now, and then in this particular story, I thought Boston would be a marvelous place because I love that Newbury Street area, and I felt like the Exeter Street Theater was a really great, very highly visual place and location. People would be able to mark that location, and then I also used my fictional town, my own town, my real town. So the crime actually takes place in Scituate, in a very sort of off the beaten track location. There's a part of Scituate that you really can't get to without permission, or if you are a person who lives in Scituate and you go walking out there, you know that you're not supposed to be out there.
Okay.
And so that became something that I was very intrigued by, and so I set the crime there. So it's my town and it's my city. And
it felt that. It felt like this is a place that Lynne knows intimately. Like it's so fully embodied that I knew you either lived there or you spent time there, that you didn't just imagine Scituate. You really
it was fun. It was fun to set it in real places, and to walk in those places and to imagine what I was going to use from those places. I think in my next novel, I really want to do the same. I want to go to places that I can really get inside. I think it makes the job of writing location and place pretty powerful.
Yeah. So you've already hinted. So do you know what you're writing next? What's up next for you?
So I do know what's next. I sold this book along with another one. So I have a book that's coming out next fall.
Oh my gosh. You're
Yeah,
amazing.
I know. And it's
That's
called
fast.
Dark Rivers to Cross. And that's going to be examining the role of identity in adoption, how that's formed when you're adopted, and whether or not parents have a right to keep an origin story from you if it involves trauma.
Oh,
So
wow.
I'll be exploring witness to violence and traumatic childhood and adoption and identity. I'm really looking forward to talking to readers about those topics as well.
That's a really fascinating combination. Wow. Say the title again, because I think I talked over you.
Dark Rivers to Cross.
Dark Rivers to Cross. All right. So in a year from now, we'll have that one as well.
Oh, won't that be fun? And
Amazing.
what novel will you be talking
Well,
about?
wait, hold on a sec. This is for you today. So do you like writing fiction or nonfiction better? Because I know you do both worlds.
You know, I really think it depends on either the topic or what societal issue I want to unpack, which direction I go. And then once I've made that decision, I feel pretty powerful that where I am is where it needs to be.
Okay.
So, you know, I've written about adolescent mental health quite a bit.
Yep.
And I really do think that there's a lot to be thinking about in terms of what happens to our brains in trauma. When I was reading Remember, that your wonderful book, I actually got quite fascinated by the section that you wrote about forgetting, because a lot of people who don't realize that while we might be preoccupied with remembering, it can be really hard for people who can't forget things.
Can't stop remembering the
Can't stop
trauma.
remembering.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty fascinated by that idea. You know, how visual brains hold information, and how people can hold a snapshot of an experience and then see the snapshot come back in full color, right? That's a different kind of brain.
Yep. Yes. So how did you decide to go with fiction for your trauma story rather than nonfiction? Like what tips the scale one way or the other?
I think if there are a lot of undiscussables, you know, if the topic lends itself toward bringing a conversation into the light, I feel like it lends itself more to fiction for me. Yeah. Because I think that you can't say to somebody, oh, well, you might have this experience, so talk about this, or you might feel this, so talk about that. It's so much more nuanced, particularly around addiction in this story. There's no right and wrong way to contend with a loved one who's struggling. Some of the questions that get raised in this book are, is it ever okay to leave? Is it never okay to leave? Right? I mean, when is and when isn't it okay to leave? I don't think there's any one answer to that question.
I know. So Zeke's wife, Nell, right, she has to wrestle with where is the line? And, you know, does unconditional love mean staying with him in this, you know, partnership, in this architecture,
right.
In this house? Yeah.
Yeah. And she had lost her father as a teenager, like I did. And so her question was, is it better for my child to have a father at all or no father? And so she's struggling with these very hard questions that there are no, you know, check this box here and there's your answer. It doesn't work that way. And the other part about addiction is that it's cyclical. So people can get better for a while and then relapse. Mm-hmm. And so what do? Someone gets better and that's when you leave? Or that's when you become hopeful that this is going to be the time that they've, you know, triumphed. Yeah. So it's very, very tricky. And as you know, so many families are dealing with these issues inside their own families, their children, their spouses, their partners.
Right. And you did such a beautiful job again. I mean, these are such nuanced, deep very human condition questions that you wrestle with within the context of a very fast page turning thriller. I don't think that most thrillers accomplish that. It's just so cool. And so yeah, I want to one quick thing. Is my dog still at the door? Yeah, my kids are supposed to be watching the dog and they're not. And he's scratching at the door. So let me just let him in. Here you. Come on in. Okay.
Everybody's welcome to the conversation, even the family dog.
This is the land of Zoom, people. The kids are ignoring the dog. Well, I am ready to turn this over to our audience and get some of their questions if you're good with that, Lynne.
That sounds great.
All right, let me see about doing that because I haven't. Yeah, Robert says to give it a go. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the Q&A.
All right.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, who are some other authors that you like to read?
Well, I love all of Lisa's books. I mean, seriously, I feel like you and I have a similar vibe in that we really want to get people talking about things that they want to know more about, right? And whether that's neurologic conditions or whether that's mental health issues or whether that's societal issues, that really matters a lot to me. So I kind of love the social novel. I really do. I love Louise Erdrich, who's got a new book that just came out, The Sentence. Okay. I love everything by Tana French and Ann Patchett. You know, I really love when there's a heartbeat at the center of fiction, you know, where the characters, whether you like them or you don't, they feel real to you. That's
absolutely
really
yeah, you know? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just trying to think. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately. But then I just read I read The Marriage Plot by Jeffrey Eugenides, if I'm saying his last name right, probably not. I read, is it The Vanishing Act?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just read that, which was phenomenal.
Yeah,
and then I actually just listened to Will by Will Smith, which was a phenomenal memoir with so much depth. So his story is fascinating. He's a great storyteller. He's an entertainer. If you're going to read that, I recommend listening to it because he narrates his audiobook and he's masterful. But
I love audio. I love audio.
I love audio for nonfiction, especially read by the author. I don't love audio for fiction because I like to sometimes reread the sentences, like go slow over parts, maybe underline something, or I need to see the language for fiction. But with nonfiction, I feel like just tell me your story. But Will was great. I thought that was phenomenal. Okay. So speaking of audiobooks, are any of your books audiobooks, Lynne?
Yes. All of them.
All of them. Do you read any of them or do they hire someone to read them?
No. Actually, for The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, they hired an actress and she's marvelous. So I felt like of all my novels, I needed someone that really got how to read and how to inhabit the characters,
how to perform it. Oh, good. That's fantastic. Yeah, I've had I read Still Alice, which was many years ago now, and I grew up in Waltham and I had a really thick Boston accent for a long time. And I've managed to suppress it and speak normally for the most part, but it comes back if I hang around people from Waltham, if I have a couple of drinks.
Or if you're tired.
Or if I'm tired. So and when you read for 5 hours a day aloud, you get wicked tired. So that was like, oh my God, it was painstaking. So I was like, I'm never going to do it again. And we had Deborah Messing of Will and Grace. She read Love, Anthony. We had Sarah Paulson,
Oh,
She
great.
read Left Neglected. So we had other people read the other novels, but then I came back around and read Remember because that book's nonfiction and I wanted it to feel like a conversation with me.
Yeah.
So I suppressed that accent once again and got back in there. It's hard reading your own. It's wicked hard. Okay.
It is.
Let me see. What's the best piece of writing advice you've received that you still use in your own writing?
Oh, okay. So anybody who doesn't know me, I'm a very positive and cheery person. But my writing advice is that you should write from where it hurts.
Ooh,
So what I mean by that, of course, is our vulnerability conversation, is
yeah.
to write from those places where you feel a little shaky, or those places where you feel like you still have something to uncover. You know, all of my work has a through line of grief, and it shouldn't be a surprise that it does. Writers return to the things they're trying to continue to understand.
I was just going to say, do you feel like you discover more about yourself, or do you find that you heal a little bit more of yourself with each book that you write?
Yeah, I think it's both. I feel like I uncover the fact that it's still always going to be part of my story.
Yeah.
I feel like I understand different aspects of it when I explore it in a new way. And it's, you know, writing is very therapeutic. I would say to any of our participants tonight that whether you write to be published or whether you write just to experience the aspect of writing, the idea of having a thought and a feeling and capturing it on the page, it's a really therapeutic thing to do. So even if I weren't publishing my work, I would still be writing.
Mm.
It's powerful. It's really powerful, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, there's something magical in the connection from thought to hand to pen to paper. And it's
Yeah.
different than typing. It really is. And I don't know if that's going to be generational because, like, my kids, like my daughter who's in college, doesn't handwrite anything anymore. Everything's typed. Um, but there's a book called The Artist's Way.
Yes.
Yeah. And she recommends a practice of every day writing 3 pages of stream of consciousness. So you don't judge, you don't edit, you don't care. It's not for anybody to see. You just
Excellent.
write without stopping the pen until you're done with 3 pages. And you can do that every day. And it so much comes through in those pages that is like, wow, I didn't know that was in me, or you
Yeah.
figure something out, or you just dump all your anxiety. I tend to do that when I'm writing, especially. I start with 3 pages of stream of consciousness. Sometimes it helps me find the next chapter when I don't know what it is yet.
Definitely.
And sometimes it just helps cleanse all of the angst of like, oh, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing, and I'm not sure this story's going to work, and I'm so afraid.
Yeah.
Dump
Right.
it
And I
out.
think what's really cool about The Artist's Way is it's super accessible to anyone.
Yeah.
And the other thing that she says is you don't even have to write about your feelings. You don't even have to write about what you're trying to process. You can just, you know, look out your window and start drawing the tree you see.
Yep.
Because her whole idea is that there's so much in our unconscious and our subconscious that we don't take time and space to let kind of percolate up. And that's what writing does. So whether or not you're writing novels like we are, or nonfiction books, or whether or not it's a short story, an essay, or even just those morning pages, there's power in letting your sort of quieter thoughts have some space and come to the
Yeah.
surface.
Yeah, I love that. Your quieter thoughts having some space to come to the surface. I love that, Lynne.
Yeah.
When you're writing, your novels, are you writing every day? How many hours? Like what's your day in the life of Lynne writing a novel look like?
So when I'm first draft writing, so that means I'm facing that blank page,
Yeah.
I don't have the bandwidth to stay with it very long. So I
Right.
only write for a few hours, because that is super hard to go from, you know, sort of the ether to to the page. But once I have a draft, I can write for a really long period of time because I'm working with something, I'm revising something,
Yeah.
I'm shifting, changing, massaging, finessing, whatever.
Yep.
So when we get to the revision stage, I'm like all in, you know, pull up those sleeves and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, that's the analytical part of you,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm similar. The staring at the blank page is the hardest. And I find the beginning of the book harder than the second half, right? Because you have infinite choices at the beginning.
Right.
But then once you've made these choices, like, okay, you've got your character, you've got Zeke, you've got Nell, you've made these choices of who they are, then you really know how they talk and walk and think and feel, and you don't have to make it all up, right? It's like, I know them now. You can just
exactly. And you know what their deepest struggles are. Like one of the things that I did with the three main characters, was that I gave them each a blind spot, a place that they just could not see behind, right? And a confirmation bias, something they really believed strongly. And so no matter what steps they took, they were setting out to prove that that was true.
Oh my gosh.
And so once I understood that that's how I was approaching it, you're right.
Yeah.
I got to the halfway point and I was like, okay, I know what they're going to do now.
Oh, I love that. So what are yours? Can you tell us what do you think your blind spot is and your bias?
This is a true blind spot, believe it or not. I really, really believe that people are all good. And so I can be duped.
Yeah, me too. I'm very gullible.
I am too. My husband says I'm like the most naive person he knows.
Yeah, I'm less so now maybe at this point in life, but yeah, I was very naive and trusting at one point.
Yeah.
Led me to the wrong man.
Yeah, but you know what's so funny though? Is that you knowing that about yourself only comes with making some mistakes, right? And you can't, and characters have to do that too. That's what it's like to be human. So, they have to make those mistakes of believing somebody is great and wonderful and super good and trustworthy, even if they're not telling them the truth, right?
Yeah.
And that's tricky.
You have such a great, like, your understanding of psychology and how and why we behave the way we do is such a tremendous tool for you in writing character. The other thing I'll mention, because the person asked for both of us, best writing advice we'd been given. I, like you, didn't grow up as a writer. I was a scientist first, but I actually trained as an actress for a couple of years in Boston, and acting taught me how to write. And you're always telling the truth under the imagined circumstances. Yes. That was my piece of advice, to always go back. That's my true north. Like, you're telling the truth, right? So that's like it's story, it's character, it's plot, it's what's the truth.
Right. And it's the other thing about acting that is so fantastic for fiction writers. And that's another thing I was trying to play around with this theater piece here, is that actors step on a stage and they have motivation. They know that even if they're just going to go over and they're supposed to bump into the couch, they know they're supposed to do that and why, right? So in fiction, it's really important to make sure that every character has a same drive. They have a motivation. They're compelled by something, right?
Yeah. Have you done acting? Have you acted, Lynne?
I did. When I was in high school, college, and a little bit beyond.
Oh my
I
goodness.
wanted to go to Bennington School for the dramatic arts. No go. My mom said, not a practical career, dear. And so I didn't do it. But I always wanted to be an actress.
Oh my goodness. What do you remember a favorite role or a favorite play that you were in?
My favorite was the first lead that I got. And it was in it was a play that was on Broadway for just a very short period of time. But the lead character was played by Bernadette Peters. And the name of the play was Mac and Mabel. And it was about the silent film star Mabel Normand.
Oh, very cool.
And it was a really cool play.
Really that's fun. Well, this is just giving me so much more information now about why you're so good at what you do, because I think that acting really teaches us, again, how to embody characters, right? Like, what does it feel like to be Zeke, Anna, now? Like, you can, if you were playing that role, like, what do these characters want? What's in the way? How are they going to be changed by what happens?
Right. And it also helps to differentiate, because a lot of writers struggle with differentiating their characters so that they don't all feel the same. And I think acting really helps you realize that, oh no, they have to be very different.
Of course. Right. And your characters are so distinctive, like really richly detailed and nuanced. Someone said, Eileen O'Halloran asks, she says, I'm intrigued by the title of this book. Can you talk a little bit about how you title your books?
Well, this is the first one that I titled that actually stuck. So the other ones have all been changed. My original titles have been changed. But this title is a compelling title. So I was really, really happy that the publishing company wanted to keep it. It really
And you pulled it from a line in the book, yes?
I did. And I think really, to me, it sums up what it feels like to feel like your life is going along perfectly well. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly, without any warning and without any control over your own destiny, something changes, and in a snap, you're in a different place. And so the danger that hides in the ordinary night is the idea that we're never prepared. We don't always know when our lives are going to change. Wow. And that visual just felt really compelling to me.
It's a great title. And yes, to the person who asked, the publisher weighs in on these things. Yes. And so all of mine, I did all of my titles except for Every Note Played. I originally wanted that to be diminuendo, which is an Italian word it's a piano term that means softening, quieting, becoming still. I thought that was such a great metaphor for ALS.
Word, yeah.
They're like, we can't have it. It's too many syllables and it's not in English. I'm like, bel canto. Why not? But it's all right. We came up with a plan B. What Diane Nunziato asks, what is the greatest gift or experience that your writing has brought to you?
I think a deeper understanding of what I care about, about really understanding what's most important about relationships. I really care about my own family and friends, but I really have a collective sort of empathy for what the world is going through. And I feel like it teaches you that. I mean, if you examine anything related to addiction, what it's really like for people who struggle with it, you walk away with just tremendous empathy. I mean, people could read Beth Macy's Dope Sick or watch it on Hulu. You can watch documentaries. You can really try to feel what it must be like to struggle. And I think you're a changed person,
Yeah. Yeah. It's the empathy.
Yeah.
It really is. That's the golden ticket right there. Joyce Schaaf, I don't know if I'm saying your last name right. She asks, the names of your characters are interesting. How do you choose your names?
So I choose them in a variety of ways. I choose names that I wish that I could have named my children, but my husband nixed them. I also use, beloved family members. I had an Aunt Nell.
Oh, nice.
And so I use a combination of I also like to mix them up. So I have some that are unique and different, but also some that are the same. So I've got an Anna and a Sam, to match my Nell and Zeke, so it's a combination.
Okay. Have
you the more novels you write, though, the harder it is, right?
This is really true. And it's like, you can't use any of the old characters' names. Yeah. I know, believe me. Has your dad's name made it into any of your characters?
Yes. He made it into my very first novel.
Oh, that's really special.
Yeah.
Okay.
My very first novel, I had a detective and a lawyer, and they had my parents' names.
Oh, that's really sweet. That's nice. Have you ever auctioned off the name of a character?
No, have you?
Yes. And so this is like, keep your eyes open for this, because charitable organizations who are trying to raise money. So, for me, I get involved in, and there's plenty of organizations I'm sure you care about. It's like organizations that have to do with addiction. But I do a lot for Alzheimer's groups and ALS and Huntington's and on and on. But in raising money for these various organizations, I'll often throw in for like a silent auction kind of thing. I'll name one of my characters in the next book, any name you choose. If you donate, if you win. So I've done that a few times now.
That is great.
Yeah, they're never the main character, but it's definitely someone. If it's made into a movie, the person will be in the movie.
Yes, and they feel wonderful about it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Okay, let's see. Rose Murphy says she loved your book and hated to see it end. Will there ever be a sequel to it?
Well, it's so funny. People are already asking me about whether or not Fitz, the detective, and Sin, the psychiatrist, will make a reappearance. And I'm starting to have so many people ask me that I'm starting to think maybe yes. So I'm thinking about it. I think it's a good possibility.
I love that you're open to that, right? If the universe is sort of sending you this message, that you're open to listening to the possibility
yes. And
of
I
that.
think that
Cool.
I'm not spoiling anything to say that each of them have something unresolved at the end of the story. And so I'm a
Right.
little bit curious about how it's going to resolve.
Yeah, I am too. And I like that you left that sort of open to us to think about. Like I have my own sort of guesses and sort of dreams for them,
Yeah.
which was lovely. Okay, we have from Kathy Harbor. She says, are either of you thinking about writing about the pandemic?
I am not. And I think it's because I need some distance from it
Same.
because it's been really, really challenging to be so close to it. I think for me, one of the things that I love about fiction is when I can get some distance, right? So I wrote about, teenagers and pressure and competition and loss, but I'm many years removed from that experience. So I've got some perspective. I think the pandemic and me, I think we need to first get over each other. It doesn't feel like it's over yet.
Well, it's
Uh,
not because we've got this Omicron variant that, because there's too many unvaccinated people, like it's
yeah.
mutating.
So I'm a little too close to it so far.
Yeah. I think for me, I would write about it if it made sense and it lent something to the human condition and the story that I'm trying to tell. Right. So like my next novel that I'm working on now is about a woman with bipolar disorder. And if placing that during the pandemic specifically would lend toward me telling that story, I would do that. But it for me, it doesn't. So it would just sort of it would be distracting, right? Because it would be a major character in the story
Yes.
essentially, right?
Yes.
So
And it would play around with all of your logistics on plot. So I think the way you've described it is really great though, is that anything we add or anything that a writer adds has to be a layer that makes sense to the whole. If it's plunked in there, it feels plunked in there.
it has to be in service of the story.
It really does.
Otherwise you're not, it's not gonna work. Okay, let's see. Oh, someone's asking. Someone said this is about Lynne, but do I have another book? I just told you, yes. I also I've been working on this since June and I should wrap it, God willing, before Christmas. We've been trying to make Inside the O'Briens into a film for 6 years. And we've had Russell Crowe twice, and we had Ben Mendelsohn, and then we had a new script and a new director, and we had Toni Collette and Thomas Hayden Church, and it fell apart again. And in June, I had a meeting with my agent and the producer, and I said, I think I have a way that this will work. And so I pitched them my idea on how to make this movie, and it requires a new script. And I without me thinking ahead, I raised my hand and said, how about if I write it? And they both said, yes, we love that. And then I was like, well, wait, I don't know. I've never written a script. And like, can we hire someone to help me? And they're like, nah, go do it. So I think I'm one draft away, just some revisions away from the very beginning step of like, no, we have a script. Let's see if we can go raise the money, get the director, get the actors, but we'll see.
That's
So
exciting.
I've been working on that and it's been fun. It's challenging. It's new. It's fun.
Yeah, and it's really nice to work on things that are challenging for you to really it's really good for your brain and it's also really good for your heart.
Yeah, right. I feel excited. I feel excited to get to it. Like, okay, kids, go to school.
It makes the work really meaningful. It does. Yeah. The work needs to be meaningful.
It is. And just like a quick so that book was about a family with an inherited disease called Huntington's. And I wrote it back in 2013 before Black Lives Matter. And I've got a white male cop is the patriarch of this family, and he's got a daughter who has a black boyfriend. Guess what? Like, this movie also needs to be about inherited racism.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to tackle. So it's been a challenge and it feels important and I'm excited.
Good.
Okay, back to you. Let's see. She says, so Alicia Downey says, I see events happening in my mind, has a plot for a story. What if, how would you develop the story? I'm not quite sure how I understand it. I think she's asking you, how do you develop a story based on an idea?
Well, I think you just, everything a writer does is with intention, right? But then you have to ask yourself whether or not you pulled it off. And so I think the only way is to write it. So a lot of writers will say, I have this really good idea, let me tell you. And I say, well, it doesn't matter if you tell me, because it's not on the page. If you put it on the page, then we can start talking about how to shape it and rearrange it and stretch it, deepen it. So I would say start writing. If you've got a really good idea, you should start writing.
And I need to give you a tremendous high five hug and just kudos to you. You also work as an editor through Grub. I believe I sent you Alicia Semenka.
Oh, you did?
I did, yes.
Wonderful.
So Alicia, her background, she's a genetic counselor, and she was up in Vancouver studying under Dr. Hayden, who is like the god of Huntington's research. And Alicia and I connected with her and doing the research for Inside the O'Briens, and we've stayed in touch because she's like, I've always wanted to write a novel. And so she's been working on it, and she said it's got to the point where she needed some help because she's got stuff on the page. And she said, I need someone to help. And so she ended up with you. You've been helping her because
she's terrific. And again, she's open-minded to getting it down on the page and taking it from there.
Exactly.
And so I would encourage anybody who has an idea to pull out that paper and pen.
Yep. All right. There's one question left on the table here. This is it. It's a funny one. Is writing a book profitable? Does it pay the bills?
Some of them do, and some of them don't, right? They each have their own lives, and they each will do their own job out in the world, and I love them all equally.
Oh, good book mama. Lynne, you're phenomenal. I'm so happy for you. Thank you for picking me to do this with you.
Oh, my goodness,
such a treat.
Pleasure. I knew you'd be the right one to chat with.
That's awesome. It's glad to be together again after all these. Oh, Alicia's here. Alicia Semenka's here. That's great. And see again, so Zoom is, not ideal, but we gather people from all over the world listening to you right now. We're all going to go out and buy your book.
Yay, here it is.
Everybody read it.
An Ordinary Night.
It's a great story. You're going to love it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my dear.
So thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much, Lynne. Folks who are watching live, you'll be receiving an email from me in the next 30 minutes on how you can purchase an autographed copy of the book. You'll also get a link to this recording and a link to a feedback survey. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lynne. Wonderful job as expected. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye all. Good night.
Bye. Good night.